Well, folks, good morning. I'm Dr. Eric Schurter with Corteva Agriscience. I'm our U.S. technical lead on the marketing team. It's a pleasure to be here today. Today, we're going to be going over what we would call our general applicator training. So, kind of a broad-based overview, a lot of the label aspects, different considerations when utilizing the product. This is one of the webinars we've been doing each month. We'll have two other ones here in March. Hopefully, it's an opportunity for you all to kind of sharpen the sword. I know depending on where you're farming at here today, I know we've started down in southern Texas. A lot of us here in the Midwest, we got another 3 or 4 more weeks before we'll be thinking about getting in the field, hopefully. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Few things just to kind of highlight here this morning. We'll give you a high-level recap of the 2024 season. We're going to kind of spend a little bit of time talking about the Enlist Weed Control System traits, just what's in them, how we're utilizing them. We'll do a Q&A answer session at the bottom of the hour. We'll go back in and start talking kind of about a program approach, some other label considerations, requirements, and then we'll have another Q&A session at the top of the hour. For those of you online, depending on where your headers are at, please use the Q&A function. That's how we'll address any questions you have. If there's a question around the Enlist system that we're not covering today, please by all means ask it. I'm sure there's other folks out there that may have the exact same question you have. So please don't hesitate. This is your all's meeting. We're going to try to give you a good webinar here today. So let's kind of get into the season recap. As you think about the 2024 season, here at Corteva Agriscience, we're very proud of what the Enlist Weed Control System has been able to deliver for our customers. We're now in over 65% of the U.S. soybean market in 2024, a tremendous accomplishment we're very proud of. And as you look over on the left-hand side, there's a lot of reasons why growers are reaching for the Enlist Weed Control System, not only in soybeans, but also now as we launch corn and also as cotton. Recognize that even though the system has been out for quite some time, there's still many areas of the United States where other systems, like the Extend system, may be prevalent. With some of the recent registration or label considerations and not having it over the top, there's probably several folks on the line. This might be your first time of really getting into the Enlist Weed Control System. So hopefully we find this very informative. Just to kind of give you some other highlights around the Enlist Weed Control System. Since we've launched in 2017, we've sprayed more than 125 million acres across the United States, across corn, soybeans, and cotton. This is our 7th consecutive year of market share gains, so I think that's a real testament to not only what the yield potential is, but that more and more growers are reaching out for the Enlist Weed Control System. And as we've said previously, with over 65% trait penetration in E3 soybeans. And we'll continue to see that rise as we go into the 2025 season. Now, not only are growers reaching for Enlist soybeans because of the yield, we have approximately around an 80% spray rate with Enlist herbicides, being Enlist One or Enlist Duo. So what that really tells me specifically is growers want the yield potential of the E3 soybeans, but they also want to spray that technology for the weed control. And obviously, as you compare to contrast, as universities have done this for many, many years, there's a clear difference between the dicamba technology and the Enlist Weed Control System. And the fact that even during the COVID years, because of how we manufacture and here in the United States, we've been able to be a very reliable supplier to meet those huge market share gains year over year. So it's something we're very proud of. So let's kind of, without further ado, let's kind of jump into the systems a little bit. We'll get some background information and we'll continue to move through this. What you're looking at here is the kind of a timeline around the Enlist Weed Control System. And if you've ever heard us speak, we've always said systems approach. And that means a lot of things. First off, it means a system of utilizing the trait, the herbicides, but also the Enlist Ahead or the stewardship component. Kind of think of that as a three-legged stool. If you pull one of those legs out, that system would not be reliable or have the longevity needed to really deliver what you're looking for in your operation. As you look at the timeline down in the very bottom, you'll see that the various milestones of when we've launched either traits, herbicides, but I do want to call your attention to 2012. One thing we knew here at Corteva Agriscience is that we had to have a very robust stewardship system in place to really steward and bring the longevity needed around the Enlist Weed Control System. That's why we launched it first, well ahead of the herbicide, well ahead of the traits. And so far, we've been able to do that exceptionally well. And we'll go over some of that as we go into the various sections here today. Just a kind of a reiteration, hopefully you're aware, but with Enlist E3 soybeans, we have tolerance to 240 choline, glyphosate, and glufosinate, giving you as an applicator or as a grower full flexibility. Now, we've launched E3 soybeans here in the U.S. since 2019, and just our neighbors to the north of Canada, they're really starting their launches here in 2025 as they start to get ramped up. But you'll see that regardless of where you're farming, we have over 120 seed organizations out there that offer the Enlist E3 soybeans. So you're able to work with your local retailers, local seed dealers, the local genetics that are adapted to your area, but also in that Enlist E3 weed control system approach. You know, as you think about some of the other things we do, and we've been doing for quite some time now, we've done a tremendous outreach effort around training, whether that's in the field, application training in person, webinars like this, to ensure that customers understand how to utilize this technology to get the most out of it. Just to kind of give you some idea of some pictures here, looking at Enlist Duo, that is our premix of 240 choline plus glyphosate. That's on the left-hand side there. That's a 1x rate. You can see very robust tolerance. And even at a 2x rate, that overlap situation, you start to see a little bit of leaf edge burn, not uncommon anytime we get 2x or 3x, and considering some of the combinations we spray out there, you get more little solvent burn, but obviously very cosmetic in nature. With the launch of Enlist corn, for those of you, some of you may have planted Enlist corn back in 2017 or 2018. That's when we first launched Enlist corn. And the tolerances that we bring with Enlist corn are very similar to Enlist E3 soybeans, in that we have tolerance to 240 choline, glyphosate, and glufosinate, but we also bring FOP tolerance, or the Assure chemistry here as a brand name, that selective grass products. Now, one thing there with the Enlist corn is we offer a lot of flexibility as it relates to herbicide tolerance. That's a big differentiator, as we've seen other competitors move away from certain traits, which may restrict you in what you're able to use in corn. Now, as I indicated, we first launched in 2017 and really kind of too late for the 2017 planting season. So 2018 was really the first year we could plant Enlist corn. Now, the challenge back in 2018 is we had to have a structured refuge. As many of you know, with the insect traits and just the hassle of having a structured refuge, it wasn't as wide area adopted. Well, now with the relaunch, I should say, of Enlist corn, specifically in PowerCore Enlist, which is our above ground traits for insect protection, PowerCore Ultra Enlist, which is the same insect traits in PowerCore plus the VIP trait, and our below and above ground in Vorseed, all three have that refuge built in. Back to the convenience, back to wide area adoption. Okay. Now, one thing that should be noted, we've known specifically with Enlist soybeans and even Enlist cotton at times, when we get into hot, rapid growing conditions, you might see that droop of the petioles or the leaves on those particular crops. Corn being a monocot crop or a grass crop, we typically do not see that type of effect. In fact, I've had the opportunity to work with this technology in R&D many years ago. But you might see an occasional leaning of that plant because this is a metabolism-based trait. Not one where we have kind of a lock and key like a glyphosate, but where the plant actually metabolizes it down. So you might see a little bit of lean for 24 to 48 hours, and then that plant will absolutely straighten right back up. Very, very subtle in nature and definitely not as pronounced, but we did want to make sure that you all were aware of that as you go into that 25 season. With Enlist cotton, we offer the same robust trait tolerances as we see with Enlist E3 soybeans, being 240 choline, glyphosate, and glufosinate. When you think about some of the challenges in our southern U.S. crop production, it is not uncommon for growers to use all three because of the glyphosate resistance and some of the weed species there. We've seen just rapid adoption in our Phytogen brand since 2016, and we have very wide area adoption of W3FE trait, being our insect traits in cotton, as well as the herbicide tolerance. So again, a lot of flexibility as we think about what that herbicide trait tolerances are able to bring. Now, just to kind of give you a picture there, over on the left-hand side is Enlist Duo, again, that 2,4-D choline plus glyphosate on Enlist cotton, comparing that to XtendiMax plus Roundup PowerMax on Xtend cotton. Now, obviously, for the 2025 season, there is no over-the-top solutions on any currently with any of the Xtend crops out there. So that's a huge differentiator. But you can see that you'll see very similar crop response on cotton, whether it carries the Enlist trait or the Xtend trait. Now, I should probably kind of reiterate, there's two different key packages out there as it relates to herbicides. Over on your right, you'll see Enlist 1, which is our straight goods 2,4-D choline, which offers greater tank mix flexibility for glyphosate or glufosinate. By and large, about 95% of the United States is going to typically reach for Enlist 1 herbicide because it has greater tank mix partner flexibility, more options for tank mixes, and gives you, again, that ability to really customize your application tank mix partners at a field level. Now, for some growers, they like the convenience of that proprietary blend of 2,4-D choline and glyphosate that we see in Enlist Duo. In many areas of the world, we still have a lot of utility that we're getting out of glyphosate. Very easy, convenient blend allows that grower to know that they have two effective modes of action, especially in a burn down situation or in season. But regardless if you're reaching for Enlist 1 or Enlist Duo, it's really those target weeds at the very bottom of this slide that are really the key drivers of why growers are reaching for the Enlist herbicides out there. Now, we talk about our Enlist herbicides, and many of you will well know that those are 2,4-D based. But recognize there's a lot of technology we built into the Enlist 1 and Enlist Duo. First, it starts with our 2,4-D choline, which is inherently less volatile as compared to the amine or the ester. Now, 2,4-D esters and amines are not new to ag. We've used them for quite some time. Typically speaking, in most of our row crop situations where they're a burn down application. Range and pasture, we've used them for many years as well. But the one thing to recognize is that we've typically not utilized them during the heat of the season for in-season applications. We knew when we developed Enlist 1 and Enlist Duo that we had to have a formulation that would minimize the volatility concerns because of ESAs, or the Endangered Species Acts, and making sure we had full flexibility and freedom for our customers to utilize these technologies. If we had not developed the 2,4-D choline, more than likely you wouldn't be attending a webinar here today, because we know that, as you can see over on that right-hand side, that the 2,4-D esters, even 70 hours after a treatment, can still have volatility, as does the amine, with what we call near zero volatility out of our 2,4-D choline. Now, we put this particular products, whether that's Enlist 1 or Enlist Duo, through a lot of testing, not only internal, but also university testing. One in where we've done hoop houses out in the field, where we can get up to 130, 140 during July and August. We'll put tomatoes and cotton, crops that are really ultra sensitive to 2,4-D, and we just don't see that off-target movement due to volatility. That's a huge peace of mind for any applicator out there. The other aspect is, that's one of the reasons why we've seen such wide area adoption, is the direct benefits that we see coming from our Enlist herbicides. Here's a direct comparison of the BATMA dicambasalt, or the salt found in Ingenia, plus glyphosate, a very standard mix that you saw in 2024. Compare that to Enlist Duo, which again is that premix of Enlist 1 and glyphosate, so an apples to apples comparison. You'll see that we're 98% less volatile. Now, the reason I bring that up is this. We've got a lot of very talented applicators out there. They read the directions, they follow the labels, you do everything right. But if the product gets up and moves the next day, that's beyond your control. That's the value proposition we brought with 2,4-D choline. You also couple that with Colex-D technology, which is the other component. That's the reduction in physical drift, where if you match up the herbicide and the nozzle together, we can get about a 90% reduction in physical drift. So we're able to not only make on-target applications, we can also ensure that they stay put where they need to be. Just want to reiterate, though, that when it comes to it, at the end of the day, Enlist One and Enlist Duo are the only registered 2,4-D products that can be applied post-emerge or even pre-emerge prior to planting. The reason we do that is think of the longevity. We're going to go into stewardship here in just a minute, but when you think about everything that's at stake here, folks, we just lost an in-season application of dicamba, which, folks, at the end of the day, even though we do not actively sell that product, that's not good for the American farmer. We need as many choices as we can get out here in farming. But by ensuring we're using the right technologies, in this case, Enlist One and Enlist Duo, over the top of Enlist crops, not only do you get the direct benefits coming from the formulation, you also ensure that technology is there for some time. So let's kind of start to get in some of the Enlist head and stewardship aspects. First off, we've kind of went through a little bit and we've talked about the benefits of 2,4-D choline there, as far as what it brings to the table, that near zero volatility. As I spoke earlier about the Colex-D component, that provides that 90% less drift than other traditional 2,4-D formulations out there. Now, the other thing about Enlist herbicides is we do have EPA mandated testing of our tank mix partners to make sure that if they're going through the approved nozzles, we're not negatively affecting the drift pattern of Enlist One or Enlist Duo. We saw the value proposition when it comes to volatility, knowing that when you make an on-label application, the wind may change the next day or 2 days from now, but the fact that that product does not get up and walk off through volatility is a huge, huge benefit. And couple that with our know-how. Enlist One and Enlist Duo were the very first products to ever go through a full-blown ESA. In fact, as Corteva Agriscience, we have more products that have been through an ESA than any other company. We'll continue to navigate those waters as we go through other re-registrations or new actives, but we have a lot of experience and knowledge in working to ensure that we bring good products to the market that ensure we're not having a negative effect on endangered species. Part of that is through just proper stewardship. When you think about the education, the management resources we put out through our product guides, our application use guides, the apps on your phone, education and training in that middle bucket there, like we're doing here today, or maybe your local in-field training that you might do with a retailer or a Corteva sales rep or a seed rep, plus all the advancements. We've built a lot of technology into the stewardship of our Enlist Weed Control System. One thing I do want to point out, though, is with any introduction of or utilizing any trait, a grower will sign a technology use agreement. And that's between the grower and Corteva Agriscience. And it's required to access any seed technology or germplasm. We continue to work with our retailers who are selling the herbicides to make sure we're properly stewarding, making good recommendations there. And we're also working with our growers to make sure they know how to utilize the technology through online webinars like today, those field days we talked about, all the other things. But at the end of the day, there's some things we do need to consider. First and foremost, it is not following any pesticide label is illegal and can result in state and federal fines. As I stated earlier, Enlist One and Enlist Duo are the only approved 2,4-D containing products that can be applied over the top. The reason I bring that up is there are a lot of consequences that can occur or have ramifications if we're using a non-approved or unauthorized 2,4-D. First and foremost, as an applicator, as a grower, if you're reaching for an ester or amine to save a few dollars, it's 100% your responsibility of any off-target movement or damage. 99% of the time, your insurance companies are not going to pick up any damage coming from an illegal application because it was a known illegal application. Now, at the same time, we do hear about that. That can force a grower to be placed on the unauthorized grower list, not allowing you to be able to utilize that technology, which is something we don't like to do because we know at the end of the day, growers need as many tools in the toolbox as you all can have. It really also threatens the access to the technology for everyone. Here at Corteva Agriscience, we know there's thousands and thousands of growers and applicators each and every year that are doing the right things. But with the Endangered Species Acts and the other considerations we have to do as a registrant, if we have further restrictions that are placed on this system because of a few bad actors, that impacts everyone in a negative way. So that's why we take stewardship so seriously here, and that's why we reach out, and we also have ways of reaching out to folks to try to find those unfortunately bad actors out there. But more importantly, as well, is when we're utilizing illegal products, that does not allow us as an organization to reinvest in our innovation. Whether that next seed treatment, herbicide, next trait technology, we spend on average about $4 million a day on R&D. That's the type of investment that allows you to continue to farm for the upcoming years. So there's a lot of consequences that can occur from not utilizing the proper herbicides over the top. Now, as we talked about, there are consequences here. One of the things that we did in 2024 is we have an anonymous tip line that anyone can report what they believe is an illegal application of a herbicide or seed aspect as well. Now, this is as we indicated, an anonymous tip line. We don't know who's reporting these in, but we do follow up on each and every one of those. And it allows us ultimately to go out and make evaluations. Was there an illegal application made? Was there really justification for that? Or was it just not understanding what was going on at the time? All those could be very true depending on the situation. But we do take each and every one of those very seriously. We also do random audits of customers. As we think about the United States, a very large place, we've got a lot of growers out here utilizing our technology. We want to make sure that we are doing random audits just to make sure. And at the end of the day, there are consequences for inappropriate promotion and or illegal use, which could be all up to reporting to state and federal state agencies, seeking restitution, restricting a grower's access, or restricting a retailer's access to Enlist herbicides. Unfortunately, folks, that is the reality of the situation. In 2024, we've had to do all of those, unfortunately. It's not that we find joy in doing any of that, but at the end of the day, for the thousands and thousands of growers out there that are doing the right things, it is our responsibility as an organization to steward this properly so that you all have as many tools in the toolbox as possible. And you can kind of see that through some of our stewardship compliance numbers here over the years from seed. We're starting to see more crop protection, audits coming into play. But ultimately, at the end of the day, folks, we are going to continue to protect the future investments there. We want to make sure that you have as many tools in the toolbox at your disposal. And we, at the same time, we are going to spend more money in 2025 to continually expand our IP program to make sure we have growers doing the right thing. We'll also work with you all at times for general awareness letters. Sometimes there's just miscommunication out there. Folks, we realize that there are some new users to our technology. There might be some mistakes made. We'll work through those. But where we know we have a direct applications and things like that are knowingly illegal, there will be consequences. So we're at kind of almost near the bottom of the hour. Emily, I think we maybe have a few questions that we can start off with.
Yes, we have several questions. So the first one, is there potential to develop enlist-tolerant grain sorghum?
Great question. So as we continue to look through other commodities, we're always looking for avenues and ways to bring technology to the masses that will benefit them. Right now, as Corteva, we're working with Ensign sorghum, which is more of an ALS tolerance. But we're always evaluating. To say that we're going to be moving into grain sorghum anytime soon here in the next 2 or 3 years, that probably won't happen, but we definitely do look to evaluate all opportunities. Great question.
Next question is on enlist volatility. So how does the enlist volatility compare to Liberty?
So wonderful question there, folks. As you look at any product that we use in ag, and let's take Liberty, let's take glyphosate, atrazine, and say Enlist One. Each one of those products has a temperature that that product would be potentially volatile at. Now, the real question is, does that really coincide with agriculture? Okay, in our normal practices. So in the case of Liberty, no one would ever consider Liberty or glyphosate or even atrazine volatile by our ag standards. Even in list one, even though there's a volatility with 2,4-D under normal agricultural practices, if you're seeing off-target movement from a 2,4 or from an Enlist one application or an Enlist Duo, 99.9% of the time it's going to be from physical drift. And in fact, to date, we have yet to have an off-target movement claim around or what we believe or could be proven as a volatility. So at the end of the day, I would have no concerns around volatility as you think about a Liberty.
All right, and then our next question has multiple parts regarding the mixing order and rates. So if you are planning to post applications of Enlist Duo plus glufosinate, what is the recommended timing, rates, and mixing order for those products?
Okay, so first off, with our Endangered Species Act and what we've been bringing with this new technology, we have at enlist.com, each one of the products has to be an approved tank mix partner. Okay. And what that means is this, simply put, when we looked at the wind tunnels for Enlist One or Enlist Duo, you get a bell-shaped curve where you have fines and you have coarse droplets for that individual product. When you add another product, does it negatively affect that drift pattern? And the reason I bring that up is this. If it does, it would not be an approved tank mix partner. Now, in the case here, Enlist Duo cannot legally be tank mixed with glufosinate. Now, think about this, folks. We have two actives in Enlist Duo trying to interact with another formulation of glufosinate. That's why that did not pass. But in the case of Enlist One, you can tank mix a glufosinate and a glyphosate together. Sometimes it's a little bit different when you think about some of the EPA we deal with, but legally you could mix all three with Enlist One. In the case of any of those products, what we first want to do is if you're in an area where you have hard water or AMS is typically a product you're reaching for, which for most folks in the Midwest we do, we'd want to put that in first because that's really conditioning the water. We want to make sure at least a third of that tank is full of water before we start the induction process. Because if you think about what you're doing with about a third of the tank, if you inducted all your products in, that's really kind of like a 3x rate at that point in time. Okay. But if you have about a third of a tank full of water, you start inducting, as long as you put those products in individually, give them a little bit of time to agitate and continue to fill with water, you should have no problems. Obviously, you can follow the order on our product handling guides, but generally speaking, as long as those three particular products, you should not have any concerns at all. Next question, Emily.
Eric, you had mentioned going to enlist.com for tank mix partners, but are there any anti-foam agents that are recommended in tank mixes?
So if you go to enlist.com and if you go to the Enlist One or Enlist Duo tank mix section, we will have different categories, folks, and you'll see all sorts of categories like herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, and so forth. If you want to go to the other category, you might see some anti or defoamers in there. There are some defoamers that are approved tank mix products, meaning they did not physically affect the drift pattern. But generally speaking, there is no requirement for a defoamer with any of these technologies. And most times we don't see a lot of foaming building up unless you've got your agitation just extremely high. For those of you that have been around a lot of our new equipment, you know that it's got a very strong agitation technology there. So if you're seeing a lot of foam, I would encourage you just to kind of turn it down maybe more to a medium or low setting. Even at those settings with a lot of our new sprayers, that's still a pretty powerful re-agitation system. Other questions?
Eric, do you want to keep answering questions or do you want to get these?
We got
Okay.
plenty of time.
Would you recommend making your first application when weeds are 2 inches tall or shorter?
Okay, let's save that because we're going to have a session on that just right here at not 5 minutes. We'll talk about some of that here in just a second.
All right. With the regulation on dicamba, do you foresee PowerCore Enlist having better ability to metabolize dicamba when applied?
Oh, great question. So folks, at the end of the day, if you've been around corn, everyone realizes you can legally spray dicamba on any corn crop. Monocot, it's a grass crop, fairly tolerant. Now, granted, it doesn't mean that you're not still going to have potential brittle snap or the concerns we have with dicamba. Enlist corn is no different than any other tech or any other corn crop out there from any seed provider. It is no more sensitive or no more tolerant to dicamba. In the case of Enlist corn, we are, and as we'll see, and you probably have seen, we have a really, really good tolerance to 2,4-D choline, which we don't see the goosenecking, the brittleness, brace root fusions that can occur with 2,4-D. So in the case of dicamba, it's not going to help you. It's not going to hurt you.
All right.
Any other questions, Emily?
We have a few questions about like what nozzles to use with their John Deere
Okay.
spray equipment.
Yep, and there'll be a sec. We're going to go over that here in just a second.
Let's go ahead and keep moving since I think a
Okay.
lot of the next questions will be in the second
Okay.
half.
So, folks, again, keep the questions coming. If for some reason we get to the top of the hour, I'll stay on here and keep answering questions. If you need to run at the top of the hour, we should still have plenty of time. But let's kind of get into the next section here. I'm gonna call it our BMP section a little bit, and thinking about how we're promoting the technology. Now, when you get into the Enlist Weed Control System, we hopefully, and you've heard us talk about numerous times, a program approach. And I'm gonna just kind of put this up here. Whether you're talking about corn, soybeans, or cotton, I'm gonna call it the same strategy, the same thought process is going into all three crops. First and foremost, we need to start off clean, whether that's tillage, burn down applications. A lot of times, depending on commodity, we'll put in our pre-emerge products with those, but we need to start clean. Then we're going to think about our pre-residuals. We want multiple effective modes of actions here, folks. When you think about corn in general, we don't have a lot of problems with corn, but we are seeing resistance not only to glyphosate, but HPPD and some other technology out there. So having multiple effective modes of action is really, really key. The way we're attacking Enlist corn is going to be a little different than how we do beans. We want that multiple modes of action pre. We still want multiple effective modes of action post with residuals, and we want that to be coupled with Enlist 1. Now, the reason I bring that up is previously we talked about in soybeans, around 65% of the market is going to be E3 soybeans or greater in 2025. We know that growers are reaching for Enlist 1 and Enlist Duo about approximately 80% of the time. If we were to go into corn or into cotton and start stripping out our multiple modes of action products and our residuals and start to rely 100% of the time on Enlist 1 or Duo to start doing all the heavy lifting, we will just repeat the same mistakes we've been making since we've had herbicides. We've seen that through the ALS years. We saw that through the glyphosate years. We have to break the cycle. And Enlist corn, where I see that really coming into play, is where those acres where you're reaching for a dicamba. When you think about that, the reason I've always asked a lot of growers, the reason they bring a dicamba for corn is they need the weed control. They need to spike it to help out another mode of action. I've never met a grower yet or an applicator that'll love spraying dicamba though, because they know about the potential off-target movement. They know about that peace of mind, and hopefully we don't have a wind event in the next 24 to 48 hours. And as I stated earlier, around 6.5, 7 fields around you of soybeans are going to be Enlist E3 soybeans. It just makes sense for Enlist corn to bring in a neighbor-friendly application with Enlist 1, bolt it on to what you're doing in that post-application, and continue to move forward just on those acres where you really need it. I don't want you to spray Enlist 1 or Duo on every corn acre, nor does every corn acre need that. You still have all the great genetics. You still have the insect protection, the ways to maximize yield. We're just giving you more choices as it relates to how to tackle some of that weed control in Enlist corn. Soybeans, very similar approach. We know we start clean. We want a multiple effective mode of action pre-emerge. I cannot stress this enough. When you look at soybeans, if we're not getting our multiple effective mode of action pre, that just limits us greatly on what we can do in season as it relates to residual. Not just from Corteva, I'm going to say the industry as a whole. We just don't have as many choices in soybeans post-emerge that give us residual. Now, in the case of Enlist One or Enlist Duo, we want those to be tank mixed with multiple modes of action. So like an Enlist One with a glyphosate or glufosinate. And now we're starting to bring in Inversa, which is going to be that product of choice for that in-season residual activity in soybeans, being that encapsulated acetochlor. Or if you want that S-metolachlor, that'd be that Everpre-X. We're trying to layer residuals as well, thinking about that program approach. Same can kind of really hold true in cotton, folks. Now, obviously, if you're in cotton country, you know there's a lot more than one or two applications involved, but the principles stay the same. We want residuals, overlapping multiple modes of action. At the end of the day, it all relates to how we manage the technology. First and foremost, traits. No trait ever created resistance. Okay, I'll say that again. Traits do not create resistance. Poor herbicide management, that's what creates resistance. Okay, so if we treat these technologies appropriately and are utilizing them successfully, we should really minimize that, and that's what the research would show. Now, we talked about there's some questions on weeds, height, and things of that nature. I'll dig into some of this. We're not going to get too far. We do have an upcoming webinar on, I call our best management practices, that we really just kind of hit all those questions we get each and every year. But over on that left-hand side, folks, if you look down through that list of kind of BMPs, you'd say, Eric, that's common sense. That's not unique to Enlist One or Enlist Duo, and you're absolutely correct. It is not unique to Enlist One or Duo. But if we follow these, I can really try to get you better weed control at the end of the day. Now, the first thing we did with our re-registration here back in 2022 is we went to one full labeled rate over the top. 2 pints of Enlist One, 4.7 pints of Enlist Duo. The reason for that is because we have a lot of different weed heights when we're out there. We're dealing with multiple flushes. We want full rates. So every time a weed sees our product, it is getting that full rate. Okay. Now, one of the things why we always say spray small is, and you'll see over here on the left-hand side, is it's all the growing points out there. You know, when you start thinking about this, you know, it's 5.5, 6 inch tall weed. If you're using a contact product, you know, like a Flexstar, Reflex, a lot of our PPOs, or Liberty, or that glufosinate, those are contact products. We've got to get really, really good coverage across that whole plant to get all those growing points. And that becomes more difficult. When they're small in that 1.5 to 2 inches and you're overlapping that residual, bringing in that in-season residual, you're minimizing future flushes. Okay. But at the same time, we all know, especially with water hemp, polymer, you can go from 1 inch to 5 inches in about 4 or 5 days. Or if you get rained out, you can be back to that weed height real quick. So trying to attack them when they're small, when you think about your operation, the number of acres many of you are trying to cover, you've got to start small so you can hopefully end up on time from a weed height perspective. I talked about our tankmix.com, our enlisttankmix.com section. Just remember, this particular requirement is all around not negatively affecting, again, not negatively affecting the drift patterns. Any of our approved products that are on that website have not been all tested for crop response. They have not been tested for physical tank mix compatibility. They're not an agronomic recommendation. They're not an endorsement or any indicator of performance. They are just indicating that it does not negatively affect drift or have a negative impact on the physical movement of that particular product, whether that's Enlist One or Enlist Duo. Okay, so that's something to think about. Now, when you think about how we're attacking programs out here, and we're looking at a 2-post program here. There's no residuals in these post situations. We're just looking at modes of action here. So in the post one here, very top line, that's either glyphosate, Liberty, or combinations with Enlist One versus the second in season, approximately 15 days later. First and foremost, when you look up here, where did we get the best weed control options to start with? Well, in this case, it was combinations with Enlist One and Liberty, all about 91%. If you look at some of the other treatments, Liberty alone gave around 82%. Glyphosate Liberty, about 86. Okay, so we're in that mid 80s. But when we start off with that two modes of action there, we can follow that with a lot of scenarios. Again, depending on what you're doing. Say you started off with an Enlist One and Liberty, and you had a little bit of grass starting to pop up. Well, then maybe then an Enlist One and glyphosate should be your next in-season application. Or if you got more broadleaves present and you've got glyphosate resistance, maybe that's an Enlist One and Liberty application. But by using two effective modes of action on water hemp, we know we can get a lot better weed control and it gives you more flexibility. I always like to start off strong. It gives you more choices that second pass. If you start off, I'm going to call it a little weaker, not as strong, you always got to bring a sledgehammer back the second time. And we all know how that usually does not always work. Now, for those of you in Palmer country, I'm not saying I'm proud of it, but when you look at a one pass, there's very few one pass programs out there for Palmer. It's just kind of impossible. And a lot of this research was not only internal, but also university. But you can say, we're about 75% control there with our first pass with Enlist One and a Liberty, and even an Enlist One and glyphosate. Not something that's grower acceptable. So when you look at that second pass, where did we get the best options? Well, in this case, it was again multiple effective modes of action. That's where we really drove it home. Even at 95%, folks, that's probably still borderline what I would call acceptable for Palmer Amaranth. I'd probably start thinking about my other pre-programs. What did I do wrong, or what did the weather that year cause that really forced me to get at such a low weed control at first pass? Those are questions I'd be thinking about. But again, point being, we want multiple effective modes of action. Let's talk about some other label requirements and considerations here, okay? So there was a question on nozzles, different adjuvants, things of that nature. And I'll try to hit on a lot of these particular things. First off, if you go to our enlist.com, you'll see we have an application guide. Very nice. Print it off, put it in a clear manila envelope or sleeve, put it by the sprayer, wherever you're tank mixing. These are kind of the BMPs to really optimize your spray with Enlist One or Enlist Duo. We talked about nozzles. If you go to our website, you will see a nozzle section for Enlist One and Enlist Duo. You will see on there that we highlight what nozzles can be utilized with a red box for the pulse width modulation system, or the John Deere exact apply system in green. And in general, you'll see that we also coordinate the nozzles. The ones in green are what I would say give you the best coverage and drift protection, where you're trying to find that balance between the two. Now, I fully recognize there's parts of the world where we're in cotton country, where we really are really hypersensitive about drift. We've got an ultra sensitive crop. You might be thinking about some of the nozzles in yellow. They're going to give you a little bit added drift protection. Okay, but with that, there comes some management considerations. And we'll go over some of that here in just a second, of ways to really try to improve or optimize your performance if you really need that added drift protection. So let's talk about two different nozzles here. For lack of words, we have an AIXR. That's kind of a nozzle we would typically recommend with the Enlist system, compared to a TTI nozzle, one more prevalent kind of with the Extend system in years past. At 10 GPA, this is water sensitive paper, we had about 20% coverage top left with that AIXR, compared to about half with a TTI. Now, if we double the volume, we approximately double the coverage, not only for a TTI, but also for an AIXR. Now, if you're in that cotton country and you really want to try to get better drift protection, my encouragement was this. I know you don't like hauling water, but you've got to get good coverage. So I would say in that case, if you're using that TTI, I would increase it up to a 20 gallons per acre. Now we're up to around 25.8%. Very similar when you compare that to that AIXR at 10 GPA. A lot of ways we could kind of skin the cat here, if you will, to try to get good coverage, but really give you the more of that balance, what you're looking there from a drift perspective as well. So things to consider. Other things are deposition aids or adjuvant systems. What you're looking at here is actually a droplet under a microscope. So in the very top left hand, you're looking at Enlist One alone. We actually had to zoom in that microscope 1,500 times to get that droplet size. You can actually see the stomates there, the openings on that leaf. Now, when you add NIS, typically speaking, we don't recommend a lot of NIS with Enlist One, but we add a lot of NIS in ag. Non-ionic surfactants tend to spread that product across the leaf. And that's what happened here. In fact, we had to zoom back out to around 850 just to almost get the droplet in the view of the microscope. COCs and MSOs, you can see them in the bottom left and bottom right. You'll start to see that we had to back out just a little bit more, but you're starting to see just a little bit of cratering on the COC and more severe cratering of that wax layer from MSO. That's the burn you see typically when you get a COC or an MSO. By understanding what you're doing and why you're adding some of this, that gives you a better sense of how to utilize those. Especially when we get those hot, dry conditions, we got to break through those wax layers. That's why typically, again, depending on where you're farming, we kind of recommend those COCs and MSOs in the tank. Also talk about susceptible crops here a little bit. First off, when you think about susceptible crops, any of those crops listed over on that left-hand side, that is a do not spray, period. Regardless of wind speed, regardless of anything else, it is a do not spray. So susceptible crops are those that just, in this case, susceptible plants. So tomatoes, grapes, cotton over on the right. In that top picture, the wind is blowing away from that crop. You can spray that field right next door, no problem. If you want to spray on the very bottom though, and that wind is blowing towards that susceptible crop, that's definitely a do not spray, period. Nope. I mean, at the end of the day, just do not, it's a do not spray. Now, these crops are what we call compatible with the Enlist Weed Control System. So corn, wheat, alfalfa, soybeans, rice, all these. No buffer requirements. As long as you're on label, following the label, you can spray right up to the end of your field without any no other recommendations or requirements, okay? Sensitive areas. Now, the reason I bring that up is these are what I would call, generally speaking, non-crop areas. Okay, and the reason we talk about sensitive areas is because that's the language that EPA utilizes for potential habitat that an endangered species could be either living in, forage on, or maybe that. So let's kind of put some of this to an examples here. So if we've got wind blowing from the north to the south, and we're trying to spray that E3 soybean field, you can spray. Extend beans are not sensitive. I will say use caution. In this particular example, we have tomatoes over on that west side. As long as that wind is truly blowing north to south and not towards the west, you're probably fine. Just recognize any minor shift whatsoever, and then you could be into a situation where it's a do not spray. What if the wind was blowing from the south to the north towards those trees? Well, yeah, you could spray, but you do need to leave a 30-foot buffer. Okay, that's that buffer to making sure that if we have any kind of food, forage, habitat, whatever, or an endangered species, that we're not going to negatively impact them in that tree line. Again, same caution towards the tomatoes. What about if the wind was blowing towards? Well, that's real easy, folks. That's a do not spray. We're just going to have to wait till the wind changes and blows directly away from those tomatoes. And then, of course, if the wind was blowing towards corn, it being compatible, no concerns. The other thing about the endangered species is today we are fully through our ESA, our Endangered Species Assessment. We have just a few isolated counties. You can see there in Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, and down in Texas, where there are sub-county restrictions. You'll see we have some county-wide restrictions there at the tip of Florida, which is typically a non-soybean area or corn, cotton area. But if you're in those particular sub-county restrictions, you'll need to evaluate and follow their given recommendations. Whether it might be crop specific or could be time of year specific, it could be a rate specific. There's all sorts of different potential evaluations. You need to do that up to 6 months prior to application. And we have, if you go online, we give you guidance how to go kind of work through some of it. But right now, by and large, folks, we have a system that is fully flexible across all the Midwest, the South, our main growing areas of the United States. Okay. One area that is new and starting to become more prevalent here in a lot of our labels is runoff mitigation measures. Okay. Now, what this really relates to is this. What we don't want to occur is this. You made an application. We get a toad strangler event. It washes that product off that field into an adjacent area. Now we're back to an ESA concern or endangered species assessment concern. So when you look at these mitigation measures, these first off just have to be evaluated. You do not have to document these. You do not have to have written record, but you do need to evaluate these. You'll see these are broken up by hydrological soil groups. So for example, in that top left, we have the A and B group. Those are our sandier soils. When you think about sandier soils, they tend to drain better. We typically do not see the kind of runoff under a normal rainfall event on those soils as compared to the C and D soil types, which are silt loam or clay loam soils. That's why we have to have more credits on the C and D category. Now, when you look at the actual table, you'll see it's broken down to a lot of different things. So for example, if you're going to make 2 applications, maybe in-season applications of Enlist herbicides, and that's all, you're going to get 2 credits. If you're doing no-till, you're going to get 4 credits. You just met the requirement there for your hydrological groups C and D. Okay, if you've got vegetative buffers, if you have cover crops, you've got all the other contour strips, grass wall rays. There's a lot of ways to evaluate and get credits towards, again, mitigating potential runoff that could impact an endangered species. This type of chart is going to be more and more common as labels come up for re-registration or we have new modes of action. So this is just going to be a part of our kind of normal customary practice as we move forward. Folks, we're kind of getting towards the top of the hour here. I know we've probably got more questions here, but just wanted to kind of reiterate. There's a lot of positive things as we think about coming up in 2025. We've had a lot of momentum with the Enlist E3 soybeans, Enlist cotton. We're seeing PowerCore Ultra, and Vorseed Enlist corn come in the market in a big way. We know growers want to spray the technology in soybeans. That's given with our high spray rate. And as you think about what we're bringing to the marketplace with the robust tolerance in corn, cotton, and soybeans, we're giving you more flexibility, more choices. We don't say you have to use all of them or exercise your right to spray all of it, but it allows you to make a more informed decision. Tailor that weed control on a field by field basis as needed to meet your needs. Okay, and that's what I really like about the Enlist Weed Control System. We're giving you a lot of flexible options. If you ever have questions, visit us at enlist.com. You'll see the various headers up there. You can get more information on herbicides, traits, stewardship, all the different aspects there. You can always reach out to your local retailer, your local seed rep, your Corteva sales rep. All of them are great resources, trusted advisors in many of your all's communities to help you make an informed decision. So with that, folks, we'll, Emily, see if we've got any other questions kind of coming in here. Hopefully we were able to address a few of those from the first session that we kind of held off on, but what other questions do we have, Emily?
Yes, several questions have came in. So the first one is regarding an application of Enlist One and tank mixing with Power Max or Liberty. Do you recommend using the Enlist nozzles, the Liberty nozzles, or the Power Max approved nozzles?
Great question. And you bring up a point that's always tough to, how do you make the right decision? I guess that's what the question is. So first off, because you're spraying the Enlist technology, whether that's Enlist, in this case, Enlist One, you have to utilize the nozzles that are an approved nozzle for Enlist One. Okay. Now, in this case, you have Enlist One and Roundup Power Max. Those are translocated products. And then you have, in this case, Liberty, which is a contact product. So we want really good coverage there with the Liberty. So in that case, we would typically, and I'm just going to, there's a lot of good manufacturers out there, folks. I'm not trying to endorse one or the other, but that AIXR or a twin nozzle. And there's a lot of that have a very similar, whether that's a Wilger, High Pro, T-Jet, they all do very similar, and you can get those. But a twin is where you have it facing forward and backwards, sprayed, and that gives you really good coverage when you think about you're trying as you're moving through the field. That's one that I know BSF recommends with the Liberty nozzles. It's a good nozzle, gives good coverage, but that's what you're trying to go after is coverage. So those are the type nozzles I would really try to go for if I was spraying that three-way combo.
Next question. If you are applying list a couple days in a row, is it recommended that you clean out the booms each night, or is there a best management practice for not cleaning out the booms?
So as far as if you're going to be spraying Enlist for multiple days in a row, there's really no concerns there with this caveat. If you're starting to put in-season residuals, folks, which a lot of us are doing, the only thing I would make sure you do is this. Make sure you're getting good agitation at the beginning of the day. We want to get all that resuspended, recognizing we're not getting all that any potential residuals in your tank or in your boom itself could be settling out. Now, where that could be somewhat problematic is this. When you think about like our corn herbicides, atrazine-based products, things of that nature that tend to settle out, if we're not getting our booms clean at the end of the day or kind of somewhat clean, they can build up in our end caps, and we've gotten a lot better. The manufacturers have gotten a lot better. But if you're just generally speaking, there should be not major concerns there at all. But some things I just call BMPs to be thinking about as you kind of finish out the end of the day.
Our next question involves making two passes. Is it recommended that your first pass be tank mixed with glyphosate and then your second pass with glufosinate, or do you recommend each pass tank mixing with the same products?
Good question. So I'd say that is a decision that have to be made at that local level. And let's think about this and kind of put it in some ways to think about this. If you're going after, if you've used glyphosate for several years and you're maybe have a low level of resistance, I'd probably start off with the glufosinate in the tank first off, because now I'm one earlier in the season. Hopefully these weeds are smaller. I'll get a more effective and uniform kill across the field. Now, if I'm fighting grasses and I know I just haven't had a lot of glyphosate usage, I might flip that because we know glyphosate does just a little better job of grass control than glufosinate. But at the end of the day, the most important thing you can do is using multiple effective modes of action. We need to try to preserve all these chemistries as long as we can. If we wear out the glyphosate, if we wear out glufosinate, we have in certain areas, folks, where glufosinate just not give us good control. It's not that it's a bad herbicide. We've just relied on it too much by itself. Now we're back to developing resistance. So that's why we always recommend multiple modes of action.
And then our final question is more on being licensed to apply Enlist, so being certified. Does this webinar count as the certification for this year, or is there a different training or module to take?
So we do these webinars as just educational seminars. There are certain states where there are auction-related training. Unfortunately, these do not qualify. So if you're in, say, for Texas or some of our southern states, you wouldn't need to go out and actually qualify or take those particular courses to get certified for your respective state. Hopefully, this gives you a lot better overview, gives you more BMPs, things from a practitioner's perspective, but you still need to go out and take those particular state level assessment courses to be certified.
And along that same line, Eric, if you have an unlicensed applicator that is currently in training, can they apply and list products under the supervision of a licensed applicator?
So, great question. I would say you're going to have to revert back to your local state. Each state, most states, the answer is yes. But there are some states where you have to have a handler's license or there might be certain requirements where you physically have to be able to see that individual versus be, say, 7 or 8 miles away. So each state is different. I would encourage you to reach out to your local pesticide organization within your state to make sure you truly understand the rules and regulations and requirements so you don't inadvertently make an illegal application out there.
All right. Thank you, Eric. That looks like all of the questions we've had coming today.
Well, folks, I appreciate your time here this morning. We're about 30, 40 days, a lot of us, from kind of getting going here. Hopefully you found this as a good review. A lot of the information I shared here today is, I'm going to call it more broad-based. Kind of think about more label considerations. As we continue to see more and more products go through a re-registration, a lot of the vernacular, a lot of the charge tables, considerations you saw here today will apply to other products. So it's going to become mainstay. If you still have questions on Enlist corn and or best management practices, we still have 2 more opportunities here in March to try to attend those webinars. Again, be safe out there. Good luck, and may you have a productive 2025.